Last June, it took workers more than 17 hours to remove the John C. Calhoun statue, which towered more than 100 feet in the air over Marion Square in the heart of downtown Charleston. The statue was exempt from the South Carolina Heritage Act, currently before the state Supreme Court. The divisive law keeps all public monuments and building names, no matter how controversial, anchored in place, unless the legislature by a 2/3 vote approves of change, as it did for the removal of the Confederate battle flag from State House grounds in 2015. Dr. Lydia Matisse Brandt, a USC professor and author of the South Carolina State House Grounds, a guidebook, explores the context the monuments are missing.
So monuments are attempts by people in the present to put the past into context that makes sense for them at the moment. And so it's a lot of very convenient history. And so the moments where you see the South Carolinians in power, which until very recently were white men, the moments in which they really try to erect monuments and invest in the State House grounds are moments where they're trying to assert that power and to use the past, and sometimes the really recent past, in order to legitimize their decisions in the present. And so what we see on the State House grounds is often a defense or an offense, a strategy by those in power to make arguments about what South Carolina has been and what it should be in the future. And so a lot of the monuments are assertions of white supremacy, some done in reaction to the Civil War, but more often in reaction to Reconstruction.
Welcome to Palmetto Perspectives. Tonight, an important conversation on how our state recognizes the past. I'm Felicia Edie. There are more than 1,700 public symbols of the Confederacy in the United States, and of those, more than 800 are statues. Last summer, as a national reckoning around racial injustice took place, we started to see renewed calls for these symbols to be removed from public spaces. From Florida to California, over 100 were taken down or renamed. In a state filled with monuments, memorials, and buildings named after controversial historical figures. Tonight, a discussion about the challenges in balancing historical recognition with what is a harmful past for so many. And you, our viewers and listeners, are invited to join us in this conversation. You can do that by commenting on our Facebook page at South Carolina ETV or South Carolina Public Radio. We have Shonda Robinson, a social studies educator for over 20 years and also an educational consultant with us. She will be taking your comments live on air. And joining us in the studio, we have Dr. Tamara Butler, Executive Director of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture at the College of Charleston and a board member of the International African American Museum. Also on tonight's panel, Antoine Seawright, founder and CEO of Blueprint Strategies and longtime political consultant. Also joining us is Dr. Aaron Foley. He is acquisitions editor at USC Press and formerly of the South Carolina Archives and History. And rounding out our panel for this evening, Tiffany James, president of the National Action Network of Columbia. Thank you all very much for joining us this evening for this conversation. Dr. Foley, I wanted to start with you. In that opening report by Gavin Jackson, we heard Dr. Lydia Brandt explain that the monuments that we see on the State House grounds can be seen as a strategy by those in power to make arguments about what South Carolina has been and what it should be in the future. With that information, if I go perusing the State House grounds today, what story am I being told? What am I seeing and hearing?
Yeah, I think it's probably not one story, but many. Although, many of those monuments, as Dr. Brandt pointed out, do tell a story about white supremacy. Certainly, the power structure as it existed when those monuments were put up. I think monuments, as she kind of indicated there, are a snapshot of a moment in time. They're not capturing a history sort of in a particularly nuanced way oftentimes, but trying to make a powerful statement about the identity and desires of the groups that put them up. And for the most part, through most of our state's history, the groups that have had the power, the access, and the ability to erect monuments not people of color. So we have really the African American monument there. It's the one. It's the newest one, but it is kind of the one that is there to stand in and tell all of that history, whereas the rest of the monuments tell a different story.
What should we take into consideration when we start to analyze statues and monuments and memorials? What pieces of information should we consider when we want to find out what they mean, what they stand for?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do, you have to approach them critically. You cannot take them at face value, and that's kind of the desire, I think, of people that put up monuments. They want them to stand powerfully and to seem self-evident and to seem as if they stand for all time. But again, they don't. So you have to approach them critically. I think ask questions: who put this there, when, why, and go back to the sources. That's a great thing about the book that's just out, the State House Grounds Guidebook. Mm-hmm. It's a quick resource. You don't have to go back into the archives. You can get that guidebook, and Lydia Brandt really kind of guides you through and lets the people that put up the monument speak for themselves, because they'll tell you oftentimes what they were thinking and what they were doing and what they intended.
I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say that this debate is not a new one. But those in support of these monuments and these symbols, they argue that we're reading too much into it. They're not about hate, they're not about white supremacy, but they're about history and heritage. What exists that says that's not the case? What are some examples that exist that says that's just not true?
Yeah, I mean, a great place to start is the speeches that were given when these monuments were put up. I mean, the people that put them there, they wanted to tell the gathering crowd sort of what they were doing. And they're pretty explicit about it oftentimes. So that's kind of a great place to start. Newspapers, we have now in our current age, the benefit of having so much digitized. You can go back, just for our city, the state newspaper through Richmond County Public Library, and you can word search these, you can search by date, and you can find all sorts of information about what's being written at the time. And I think that's really important to get that kind of contemporary look, because it does, I think, contextualize appropriately and probably, put the lie most often to that, strictly heritage sort of argument.
Got you. I wanted to ask each of you, within your areas, so we have education, politics, history, literature, artists, and activism. We have a lot of industries represented here. Within the realms of your space, does the debate exist there? We see it in public, especially during certain state holidays and events. We get the opportunity to see these two opposing sides. What about within the spaces in which you work and serve? Dr. Tamara, we'll start with you.
Oh, no. So, I think one of the things is that for us, we see it in talking about what gets to be saved and what doesn't. So we think specifically around, for example, working at the Avery Research Center, we're an archive, a library, and a museum. Mm-hmm. And so it's a question of what do you get to put at the forefront? What do we get to preserve? The fact that Avery exists is because there really is no space for Black archives, right? So it's like, well, what gets to be saved? So monuments are put up to tell a certain kind of story, tell a certain kind of history. Black stories and Black histories really get buried in special collections. They're sometimes highlighted. They may only highlight violence. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important. One of the things that we see is really the concept of whose history gets to be saved. And so in terms of archive work, we're really adamant about, we would love for everyday people's stories to be preserved. And so the question is, are we all about just celebrating heroes and heroines, or are we really trying to bring in all voices and all stories? So that is one of the balances of the archive.
Got you. Antoine?
Well, of course, it exists in my line of work because unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you dissect it, the American experiment has always been shaped by big events pushing us to either make progress or roll the clock back. And so when there's a shooting, when there's a big incident, i.e. 9 Black parishioners being killed in a church in Charleston, South Carolina by a certified white supremacist by the name of Dylan Roof, it brings up these discussions, and we start to evaluate not just monuments but also conversations and leaders and who we honored and why we honored them at the time. And so, of course it exists. But I'll say a couple of things to that. Number one, I'm a big fan of history. In fact, George Santiago says, if we do not learn from history, we're bound to repeat history. So I appreciate history in its rightful place. I also say that symbols matter, and they matter a whole lot, i.e. why we had the Confederate battle flag debate in South Carolina for so long. The third thing, Scripture teaches me that to everything there is a season. These people that have been honored by whoever decided to honor them, they may have had their rightful place in time to be honored. However, we always keep evolving in this country. And so while they may have their rightful place, we can honor them by putting them in a museum, putting them someplace where they can be honored, but not public statues, because there are parts of history that we should not be proud of in this country. Because when you come from communities that look like mine, as a 36-year-old grandson of sharecroppers from rural South Carolina, and I see some of these symbols that are in public grounds that are being paid for to be maintained with public dollars, it's depressing. Why not expand history? Why not highlight the things we all can be proud of? Because that's how we continue to change the conversation and move our country forward.
Dr. Foley, within your work, how do you see this debate play out?
Yeah, I come at this, I think I wear a couple of different hats in this. I come from a background both as a public historian and a preservationist. So there is that impulse, I think, sort of amongst that, group to preserve. It's in the name, right? So I think particularly sort of early on, maybe, in the past decade, there was some tension of, well, we need to preserve these monuments, we need to tell these stories, we need to add context. That's the way forward here. I think that has evolved more and more over probably even particularly the past 5 years, to the point where there's a lot more willingness to remove monuments and to talk about sort of the proper time, place, and way of doing so. So that's one perspective I bring. And then now I'm working in book publishing. So again, I'm like Antoine, very interested in history, preserving history, telling those stories. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So that's how I'm.
Thank you. Tiffany.
Yes, well, I wear several different hats as well, as a political strategist and social justice activist, and also an artist. And it definitely live in all three of those spaces. I would say, like Antoine, every time a George Floyd incident happened, the 9 parishioners that lost their lives while they were praising and worshiping their God, whenever we hear about these stories, you're reminded of, the statues that surround us, that it's being honored. And I will say that I love history as well. Mm-hmm. And I used to be a social studies teacher. But history belongs in the museums. So I was at the Confederate Relic Museum about 2 weeks ago, and it was a great history lesson. And that's exactly where a lot of these symbols and monuments should be if we want to know history. But if we're going to honor somebody, mm-hmm. it has to be someone who represents all people and not just, people from the past or just a certain, aspect of society. So the Confederate statues are to commemorate and to honor. And so it's definitely being honored in all of those spaces, mm-hmm. and it needs to be put in history in the museum. As an artist,
yeah.
It exists, but as artists, we like to recreate, and so we like to recreate stories and make it our own. We just had a rally at the State House grounds on the anniversary of the Mother Emanuel 9. And that was on June 17th. And it was to confront and confiscate the Confederacy state of mind. Yeah. And what we're doing is basically reimagining what it would be like if these symbols didn't exist, physically and also mentally, right? How can we recreate spaces of joy for, people of color? So we kind of just tell our own story with the statues and symbols that surround us.
Mm-hmm. Antoine.
Felicia, mm-hmm. we have a tendency in this country, especially in our state, to sweep so many things under the rug. And as a result, our state and our communities find ourselves having lumps in our carpet, and generations of people trip over those lumps because we want to sweep things under the rug. The good news about this conversation we're having is the tectonic plates have shifted. The last 2 polls I saw, Quinnipiac and a Washington Post poll, majority of Americans, that's Democrats, Republicans, black, white, majority of Americans, meaning over 50%, agree that these statues should be removed. The unfortunate thing about a place like South Carolina where we live and many southern states is we honor people when they die, and usually when they die for something horrific, in particular people who look like me. It took Clemente Pinckney's picture being hung at the State House only because he was killed the way he was with 80 other people in a place in Charleston. There's so many beautiful, bright spots of South Carolina history where we can honor so many pioneers and so many African Americans, and we don't have those discussions. And I think that's where the majority of the problem lies when it comes to statues and even discussions about people who should be honored, in particular this state.
I want to shift a little bit. In 2000, when the Confederate battle flag was removed from the top of the State House ground, the dome of the State House, we saw the South Carolina Heritage Act emerge, which protects these symbols. This past May, the Supreme Court heard arguments that this law is not constitutional, and we're waiting to hear the next steps. If this law is deemed unconstitutional, what changes do you think, if any, will we see here in the Palmetto State? I'll start on this side this time, or anybody could jump in.
Yeah, if it's deemed unconstitutional, I believe that we will finally get these statues and symbols of hate taken down. Particularly, J. Marion Sims and Ben Tillman, even like USC and Clemson, they were trying to change the names of different buildings. We'll be able to see name changes to honor people who are alive, to honor people who are doing great things for this state in this day and age. So I think that we'll see a lot of positive change. I also think that we'll have some pushback. Of course, with all change, there's going to be pushback. But I think that, overall, it's going to be, a wonderful change.
I think, one of the things that is the problem, I think, with the Heritage Act and other acts like it, that it helped to inspire across, much of the South and indeed, other parts of the nation, it preempts democracy. It preempts the ability for local communities to make decisions about what stories they're going to tell in their communities about themselves. Now, that doesn't mean that that's always going to turn out maybe the way that people on the stage would want, but it would provide the opportunity for democracy, small d democracy, to have a place for people to meet in the public square, to meet in their town councils, and really talk about, hash out, what do we want to present to the public when they come to Greenwood, South Carolina, when they come to Columbia, South Carolina. Not what does the state legislature in Columbia want us to say, but what do we really want to say about ourselves?
Antoine, any changes you could?
Well, I'll say this about the Heritage Act. Yes, the Supreme Court will have some sort of say in the process, but keep in mind, people use things like the Heritage Act, monuments, road namings, and statues as sometimes a weapon of political mass destruction and a weapon of political mass distraction.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we live in an environment in a 24-hour news cycle where you have keyboard thugs who use these kind of issues as right-wing, toned-down, racial divisive rhetoric. And that sometimes has influence on political leaders who eventually make decisions even after the courts may make a decision. And so while I remain cautiously optimistic, while I breathe our hope, as the South Carolina motto would have us to say, or have us to repeat, I also am realistic. I'm realistic because it literally took, respectfully, everybody on this panel, 9 people being killed in a church in Charleston by a white supremacist in order for the Confederate battle flag to be removed from the grounds of our Capitol. We cannot afford, as a country, as a society, and as a collective South Carolina community, for another tragedy to happen in order for us to push towards progress in our state.
Dr. Butler.
I think my biggest concern is thinking about what happens in the absence. So for me, I'm always interested in like, okay, so we take Marion Sims' name off of a building. I want to know why you put it on there in the first place, right? That's the other part of the change that I want to see. Is I know right now we're teetering on the edge of this. Should we have critical race theory in classrooms? And I think the real question is, if we do not, then we can't unpack why the Confederate statues need to come down and what you put in its place. For example, I really admire what happened in Richmond with some of the statues and how I thought it was beautiful the way that people reclaimed the space. And so I want us to think about that as well as we talk about change, is thinking about how do you reclaim the space? So now that John C. Calhoun is off of his pedestal, what do we do with that? Do we knock down the rest of the pedestal? Do we build on top of it? For me, I think about change in terms of how do we use that to continue to teach? So that doesn't mean that Marion Sims gets buried even further down into the books, but instead it's like, why did this university, why did this college, why did this community decide that it was important to name this building after this person and then replace it with whoever's name, right? And I think that that's the part that I want to see is the more of the dialogue around that. I also think, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm open to correction, I understand that there's also another part of the Heritage Act that I think people overlook, is that it protects Confederacy and civil rights monuments. And so there's also this interesting balance where I think it can open the door for now the destruction of other things, of other monuments. But like I said, I'd be open to.
Well, I think there's a great point there in just sort of reimagining what the monumental landscape looks like in our own time. I think it's a great point that you make about the way in Richmond on Monument Avenue, the projections that were put up during the protests last spring. Those were, I think, the greatest counter monuments I've seen. Because one of the things that's always a problem, in thinking about contextualizing or putting up a small sign to tell the story, it's always dwarfed in scale compared to the monument. But those sort of recaptured the space, reclaimed the space, transformed its meaning, and I'd really love to see, us as a community, as a state, sort of think about, what will our monumental landscape look like moving forward. I think, thinking about art, Ija Charles, an artist here in Columbia, has done beautiful murals that tell the story of the city and civil rights here. There's all sorts of opportunities that we have, and I think that's a great way to think about it. Is not just a story of destruction, pulling down monuments, but how do we tell our story?
Absolutely.
And I think, really great part, great point. Our conversation online, I think, will be a really good time to bring those in. Again, thank you for those of you participating in tonight's conversation on our Facebook page. But Shonda, what are some of the conversations we have online?
One of the comments is, since symbols matter, and that was earlier to your statement, are there ways that we might re-image a monument? Or should they be erected to honor people or ideals?
I think that falls into all of us participating at the ballot box. Whenever the Supreme Court makes whatever decision they're going to make in South Carolina, lawmakers will essentially have some say-so, whether it's at the state, local, or federal level in some way, shape, or form. And so if you really care about what history looks like in the state, you'll use that perhaps as fuel to show up at the ballot box and have influence on those who will make those decisions. Same thing with college and university boards, by the way, who are appointed by elected officials at the State House, who, if the Supreme Court decides to unpackage the gift, they will then have some flexibility to make whatever decisions they want to. Where we get jammed up in a place like South Carolina and other places around the country, we're not in the business of expanding history. We're in the business of looking back at history. Why not expand history? Why not open up and talk about the things that matter? Forget about all the dark stains on the windows of history in this state. Forget about Calhoun and so many others. Why not talk about leaders that are doing things that have continuously moved the ball forward to get South Carolina, not about what she was, not about what she is, but what we know she can be?
I think when we talk about expanding history too, I think that does include statues, and it includes symbols and people as well. And also, like what you were saying about the artists, it's about reimagining, right? Reimagining the symbols, reimagining what statement or what symbol we would like. So John Sims, he was an artist that was detained here, wrongfully detained, and racially profiled. He recreated a symbol, and it was the Afro-Dixia flag. And the recreation of that flag is the Confederate flag, but in Pan-African colors. Mm-hmm. And it's basically to symbolize the recreation of how we can make our world what we want to see. So yes, I think that what the question that addresses the question as far as it being symbols or a person that's being honored.
Felicia, we have such a rich history in the state. Before Rosa Parks, there was a lady in Eastover, South Carolina by the name of Sarah Mae Fleming, who actually set up the case for the Rosa Parks Montgomery case. If it wasn't for the first African-American mayor, Steve Benjamin, in Columbia, South Carolina, perhaps she would have not had her rightful place. You have Robert Smalls. There's so many powerful stories that have been birthed and they have helped the nation grow right here in South Carolina, where we will not even honor some of our own. And I think when I mention expanded history, when I mention symbols matter, I think that's where we have to shift the conversation and shift our focus to.
You know, the very first episode of this program last year, in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, we talked about the broad coalition of people of different walks of life going to the streets. We talked about the support that people of color, African Americans and people of color, were seeing because of that horrendous video and that horrible crime. And I'm hearing a little bit of that now. It seems like at this particular point of this conversation, we're seeing a larger coalition of support for the removal or some sort of changing when it comes to these monuments. Are you optimistic that from this point that we are at now, this awakening, this more educated point that we are at now, that we will see real change that will encompass what you all are bringing to the table, talking about?
Yeah, I think so. I think I really love Tiffany's point about the reimagining of art and reimagining of symbols, and I think it will. I think it will also make us, as we become more environmentally just and savvy and conscious, I think it also changes what we use. So too often we want permanency, right? And I think in this particular moment, if we want to talk about what South Carolina has been and will be and all of that, Yomira Figueroa Vasquez introduced me to the word palimpsest, right? And I think, and a muralist introduced me to the concept of ephemera. And the idea that if we really want to think about how to honor people, it's really about pulling back in all these different layers. And I think our change needs to be in like what we create. Do we really need a bronze statue, right? Do we really need a concrete image? No, because our ideas and visions and work toward each other is about like chipping away at, right? It's about slowly coming to a different consciousness. And so for me, I really am thinking that we may want to rethink how we think about how we're going to honor people. Does it have to be a mural that we keep sealing, or is it okay if it peels away and we can actually start to unpack history? And I think it's us having a different mindset about what it means to honor, because while we have Rosa Parks and we have Alice Wine and we have Esau Jenkins and Septima Clark, there's all these other people behind them. There's also all of these other folks in front of them. And in this kind of issue of permanency, it's real difficult to just, I don't want to stay there, right? So I think that's why I really believe in talking with artists and creatives, that I think we can get to a more responsible way of honoring and celebrating that also doesn't destroy the environment.
I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it too, and framing it in this mode of environmental justice, which is not a way that I've thought of it before. But I think this kind of gets to one of the points that we're talking about when we're debating monuments that were put up in 1870 or 1913. We are still beholden to people long dead. and they
Yes.
continue to have dominion over the landscape. So what kind of hubris do we have to say that we're going to do the same? We're going to sort of take something down, but then we're going to put in its place something that lasts for all time, or ostensibly so. But
That's why I think that placemaking is very important. Complete streets and placemaking, because you can create something that honors life as we know it, life on earth, like everyday life, right? So like on Main Street, they have the drums, the art installation with the drums, where people from all walks of life can come and, make some music. There's so many different things you can do with placemaking where you can honor human life today instead of just putting up a bronze statue or, painting a mural that stays there forever. So I think that's another way we can look at honoring life.
A statue doesn't have to honor a person.
It doesn't.
It could honor something outside of a person. And there's so many big events that have shaped the American experiment that have helped shape the South Carolina experience. And I think, while I think you're right, we should not repeat the sins of previous generations, whether we agree that people should be replaced over time or not, but we can evolve and get better. But I also want us to have a point of clarity and add some soberness. Just because we remove statues and take down street names and so forth, that does not remove that America's first sin, and that's racism in this country. And sometimes we think because a statue comes down, because a symbol comes down, that means the problem goes away. It does not. The reason I'm optimistic, the reason I'm hopeful, because I think generations are starting to change. This is not my sharecropping grandparents' America anymore. It's starting to not be the America my parents once knew. It's our America now. And our generation seems to care about the experiences of our peers more so than the history of our parents. And I think that could set the tone. If people with differences, different life experiences would come to the table and realize we have more in common than we do not, I think that's how we push towards progress and change that we all can be proud of.
Pushing towards progress. We're going to turn now to social media because we have a really good comment here in this conversation, part of the conversation.
As the state and the country evolves, shouldn't monuments be just that? Monumental. Monumental to all South Carolinians rather than a particular race. And I want to jump in and say, as an educator, how are we going to teach and continue to teach history? Is how we're teaching it now, and continue to teach history. Like you say, the terminology of it expanding, it does grow. But we do have to understand where we came from to how we get to now.
Yeah, I mean, I want to jump in here, and because that actually is my background, is education. And so one of the things that I think is important is getting us to think a little bit about teaching our students isms, because I think we want to start with racism, but America's actual first sin is imperialism. That's the whole reason we're here. We got here, right? That's the whole reason Christopher Columbus set across the ocean is imperialism, right? And so it's also part of its misstep. But those things go hand in hand: racism, sexism, discrimination, imperialism. Like all of those, colonialism, all of those are linked. And so if we want to teach students about our history, it's also getting them to develop a shared language. And so I think that's usually where we miss the mark. We want to teach history as linear, and we only follow one line. The issue is we know the history is not. There's too many people involved for it to go in one direction. Christina Sharp says it best: the past that is not yet the past always ruptures the present. And I think that's where we are. We're in this moment where it's like, we need to understand what the past is and what those pasts are. So we're teaching with an S. I think too often when we talk about education, it's set curricula that goes in a linear fashion, that stops at these interesting time points, that doesn't look at what our peers were doing in another area of the world. Like all of those things are interlocked. America can't teach its history by itself. It was never in a vacuum, right? It is part of the imperial project. And I think that that's part of it. The whole project, the Manifest Destiny, slavery, genocide, all of that is part of how America built itself. And so until we actually talk about isms in a cluster, our students are only going to be able to talk in one dimension. But I don't think this generation is doing that. I think this generation in particular has so much language, and it's a matter of us making sure that our schools catch up to the language our students are learning, because people are teaching on social media. And so for us, it's just catching up and making that kind of, being able to weed out what are the facts from what is somebody's opinion, really getting critical thinking. So for me, it's all about plurals. I'm a big fan of teaching in plurals and in multiple directions.
Out of all the isms that exist in the world, isolationism is the worst of them all. And somehow or another, when we have conversations about history, we isolate things to certain conversations. Look, the history that Antoine C. Wright knew as a young student at Swansea Elementary School, Sand Hills Middle School, Swansea High School, is different than my sister will have her instructors teach, who's the principal at Swansea High School. Totally different. History is changing at a pace that it did not change before, believe it or not. And with the idea of social media and a 24-hour news cycle, the world has to keep up, and our education system has to keep up. So the question now becomes, what do we identify as important? When I was in elementary school and high school and even middle school, we didn't have to have conversations about the browning of America. We knew it was coming, but it did not happen. We did not have to have the conversations even about the browning of South Carolina. Well, in 5 to 10 years from now, that's going to be a reality that we're going to have to teach. And what does that look like? And how does that compare to previous times in our state and our nation's history? And that's why the word evolving is so important to me. And we have to keep, again, pushing toward progress. So when and how we evolve will actually determine what the future of not just our country, but our state and our communities look like, particularly communities that look like mine, who've been left out of the historical conversation for a very long time.
Sean, do we have another comment?
The viewer wants you to go back to the idea of monuments more. What are some good concepts and people we should potentially consider for monuments?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple of things here it brings to mind, but there was just recently a friend of mine, a historian, Tyler Perry, wrote a great op-ed in the Washington Post a couple of days ago about the diversity of South Carolina's history and how many people we have here, and the stories, really the panoply of stories that we have to tell. Just thinking about one era of Reconstruction, I think, you know, we often get Robert Smalls, and that's a great story in the Planner, and it's dynamic and it's interesting, and it's you know, there's tension, but there's so many more people there. You know, there's R.H. Kane, there's Joseph Hayne, there's R.B. Elliott. You know, they're all serving in the U.S. Congress from South Carolina in the 1870s. You know, tell those stories. Tell the stories of you know, Celia Saxon Dial here in Columbia. You know, a public educator. You know, whose school sat right on the site of what's now the Strom Thurmond Fitness Center on the USC campus. You know, tell those stories. Richard Greener, you know, now has a monument on the USC campus. But there's many of them out there to tell.
We want to go back to Facebook right quick.
Painful history is still history. What about healthy healing?
I think that I go back to the comment that you made a little while ago. After we remove these monuments, then what does that space look like? I think that's a big part of healing this difficult past for so many.
I like what Tiffany said earlier about art and joy and making space for joy. And I believe that that's the biggest thing about monuments. I think I really, like I said, I loved what happened at Richmond because I specifically remember the 2 young Black women ballerinas that were standing there, and they like performed in front of it, and then they took these photos in front of it. And I think that that's also the part. I say that we think about people, we're talking, for example, I think about plantations and the students at Tulane who went and took photos, the medical students who took photos at one of the like enslaved people's like at the ancestors' dwelling. And so for us, monuments it should have the same kind of reckoning with, where people can go and actually heal, right? Can we have conversations? Can I enact dance? Can I paint? Can I meditate? Can we, you know, smudge, right? What does it take like, can we use those spaces for that? And not so much about, and I think that opens up like dialogue, conversation, artists to have installations and dialogue as well. And I think I don't think you really need a monument for healing, but I think so much of what we focus on is the violence, and we understand that there is so much violence. We also have to recognize that people were resilient and survived, and where's the celebration for that, right? Where are the monuments and memorials and the thing to remember and commemorate those moments? So I would love to see those.
You know that classic, no pain, no gain? We all know that classic from our parents' day. And truth be told, it takes pain in order for us to gain something, in order for something to give birth, to be birthed into the world. I'm not a woman, but I've read a lot of books and heard conversations that you have to push, and it takes pressure, and it takes pain to give birth to something. The push that you're starting to see from my generation and the pain that it caused my parents' and grandparents' generation, I think will give birth to something really new and special that we all can be proud of. The problem is we have this tendency to ignore, turn down the volume on the reality that these things exist. We want to conduct ourselves or convince ourselves that these things did not happen. And when we talk about the fact that they did happen, we say that it really doesn't matter because we've quickly moved forward. No, let's admit we had a problem, let's deal with the problem, and then let's fix the problem so that generations of people do not repeat the sins of previous generations.
I think when we talk about just healing, we have to talk about honoring life, right? You have to honor life to heal. And when we look at our legislators who are keeping the Heritage Act intact, they're honoring dead people who house the spirit of the Confederacy, or most of them do, right? Instead of honoring, people who are here today who house, the human spirit. So I think that we have to look at what can we do, like I was saying earlier, to create spaces where it's not just a monument, but spaces for people to get together from all different backgrounds. I think someone mentioned diversity before. All different backgrounds to come together in a space where we can create joy, where we can honor our lives as it is now.
Felicia, can I tell you something?
Yes.
It's so funny. We're like one of the only countries in the world that I know of that honor people who lost.
Right.
The Confederacy lost.
Right.
But yet we're honoring these people with statues and so forth as if they were successful and victorious in their works. To me, that is backwards in a real way. And unfortunately, a lot of these conversations, when we talk about pain and moving forward, the only way they're going to happen is they happen outside of the walls of the state capitol, in our homes, in our churches, at our dinner tables, places where we have intimate family discussions and we acknowledge the fact of how we need to move forward. Because if a child in 2021 hears the same rhetoric and language of generations from 2 to 3 generations before, they are going to dictate or really repeat that same behavior and language. And so we never move the ball forward. And we'll keep having these conversations years and years and generations later.
We've used the word repeat and evolve, talking about history, going back again to that beginning piece with Dr. Brandt talking about how monuments can be a strategy for the people in power to put out a particular message. How do we not repeat ourselves? And I ask that because this past few weeks, we've seen increased conversations about these monuments and some movements. So most recently yesterday with that internal commission at the University of South Carolina saying that the Strom Thurmond Fitness and Wellness Center should be renamed along with 10 other buildings on campus. Back in June, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to remove Confederate monuments from public spaces in the Capitol. And then July 4th of July, right? Charlottesville, Virginia, 2 monuments came down there. But if our history changes and if the people are in power changes and fluctuates, is there something that can be done where we have like a base standard so that as time progresses and the different groups of people are in power, we don't either, what you just now said, stay where we are and move backwards?
Something I've always thought would be interesting. I'm not sure how practical it is. Antoine can tell me from a political standpoint. But to think about, how long are we really willing to, have a monument stand? I mean, maybe there should be, a 25-year lease on the land that you put up a monument, and then there's a referendum. You come together, sort of the locality, and they say, are we willing to continue to tell this story? And maybe there's an extension of that and it goes on, but you have a continual kind of reflection and ability to say, like, let's really think about what we're doing here, be intentional about the monumental landscape that we're creating for ourselves.
Right, and kind of like retire the statue and put it in the museum.
Yeah.
I think that's smart. The one thing it would teach us is patience. We honor people for eating more hot dogs than the other in this country and in our state. I mean, we honor people for things that really, in my opinion, can be honored in a different way, but we honor them in a big way. But let's be patient. Let's let time play out when it comes to honoring and recognizing people for their achievements. Because while in one generation they may be highlighted, in another generation it's totally different. And I think we have to learn patience when it comes to honoring people and honoring events that happen. But if you want to say it's practical, now I agree with you, so we're going to convince ourselves it's practical. but can I say one more thing?
Yes.
Listening to the ecosystem. I mentioned earlier that majority of Americans agree that it's time to remove Confederate statues. You have a group of leaders all across this country who have not kept up with the times. They're so focused on the noise, they have not heard the lyrics of the people who are trying to tell them what needs to happen in order for our country to heal and get better. And I think we have to start listening to what's going on in the ecosystem. And if we do that, we'll know that it's time to transition leaders who have been honored to honor a new generation of leaders.
And frankly, I mean, that's how history works.
That's right.
I mean, certainly as a discipline, that's how history works. You get that term revisionism sometimes thrown around as a pejorative. But I think for historians, it's good for business in one sense. I mean, you always have to be rewriting history.
That's true.
But history is always written through the lens of the present. You're trying to understand the past on its own terms, but you're always bringing something of yourself to that study, and sort of how we understand the past does evolve. So we have to be willing to think about that, not only in the books that we're publishing and writing, but also in the monuments that we're erecting and maintaining.
We want to take one more social media question.
The question is, well, how do we begin to heal? Or what ways can we start the process?
That's a good one. It's so good, it has everyone thinking.
It's profound, but as I sit here and think about the monuments and memorial and the teaching process, and where do we begin, where do we cut it off? And when you talk about the standards, the things that are prescribed for teachers, and we always have these committees, and when we pull them together, well, where do we begin? And who do we leave out? And who do we include in history? And how do we teach? Because our children do need to know it. People do need to know it, because when the old show with Jay Leno walking the street, he'd ask just a basic historical fact, and people get it totally wrong. Who won the Civil War? And some people even, what is that? Or Northern aggression, and then couldn't even answer who won it. So then we have to still teach it, but then looking at it and saying, well, how long? One of the things now, the standards have historical thinking skills. Periodization is one of them. Okay, that was a period of time, and that defined that period of time. How do we define this period of time? Putting up new monuments to describe this period of time, so when the next culture arrives, how do they look at us?
Yeah, I think one of the things with healing that I think we sometimes miss is just the idea of listening. So as someone who's now on the board of a museum and is in charge of a museum, is we can't just drop off all the torn down monuments at museums.
You think?
Right? Like, and nobody wants those, right? Like nobody wants to fight over those. But what it does, though, is it does open up a conversation of what can I do? I think that's the other part with healing. It's what can I possibly do as an individual? What are your spheres of influence? What can you do institutionally? What can you do as a collective? And then just really thinking about like, what is the responsibility of schools in this healing process? Even though we know schools have their own long history, right? But what is everyone's responsibility? What can you do? How do we create spaces for artists, curators, legislators, community members? How do we get all of those people, educators, all at the table to start to say, like, what do we want to do here, right? How do we want to handle this? How do we want to teach? Can we get reinforcement? Because I think that's the other part about the work is that if we're doing, for example, in working with pre-service teachers, we gave all this critical theory, right? And we're like, you can go out there and teaching to transgress. And then they get in the classroom and it's like, these standards say, I must do this. So, right? So it's like, but it didn't reinforce the thing that we were we were doing. And so I think it's the same thing. If museums are doing this, if legislators are doing this, if we're all using the same language and working towards like, we're not going to bury the history, but we want to actually, we want to like transcend it, right? We want to use it to go to a different level. Then we have to figure out how can we listen to each other. And I think, and understanding what people's limits are, right? So that's just my thing. I think the healing process starts with a lot of listening and listening across the board and across the aisle. Sometimes, so I think that's the most important part is sitting down and figuring out how to listen and figuring out what can you actually do.
Right.
I think. Go ahead, Tiff.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that healing is a journey, and I think we already started it. So it's not where we begin, but how do we continue it, right? So we're doing that with conversation. So we're doing that right now. We are healing right now, having this conversation. We're healing with, having the debates. We're healing with, challenging the Heritage Act. We're healing we're already doing that. I think it's just, about searching yourself. Because, in yoga, they say, you have to fix yourself before you go out and fix the world. So search yourself, educate yourself too, because, with all the isms, sometimes somebody who's marginalized don't want to explain why this is offensive to me, right? So educate yourself and then get together with a group of people and create change. Create change through art, create change through advocating, create change the best way you know how. So I would say the healing process has already began.
Do you think it's possible to have a two-way street with healing, or at least some sort of symbiotic relationship, right? So we're talking about the healing of those whose history is not readily told or accurately told in history books and through these monuments, but what about the other side? When you have conversations with those that support these monuments, you can feel the strength, for lack of a better term, and what they lost, the family and the people they lost. And we're talking about how we want to reimagine not just South Carolina, but the nation. But they need healing too. What are some, as we kind of start to wrap up the show a little bit, what are some examples of how both sides can heal? And so that we can have real effective change and truly walk in harmony on the other side?
Well, I think it starts with self-evaluation. My vacation Bible school teacher when I was younger, Miss Julia Bell, used to say, if it is to be, it's up to me. And so we have to do a lot of self-evaluating in this country. And after we leave that phase, it's how do we control the controllables? Because not everything is controllable. Yeah. How do we prioritize the priorities? How do we focus on the focus? And if we do that, we will have clarity around the idea that my experiences may be similar to yours, but there's also differences. Same thing with everyone else on this panel, but we have to talk about, well, let me say that a different way. We have to learn to yell about the places we agree and get to a place where we whisper in the places we disagree. We get so caught up on yelling to the places we disagree and whispering to the places we agree that we can't heal and move forward, and we can't make change as we need to in this country. I learn better when I surround myself with people who have zero life experiences in common with what I do. And I think if we all took that approach and learned to speak up and speak out about where we agree, but also have real conversations about where we disagree, some of these issues that we have discussions about and we want to like beat each other up about, we'll quickly realize like there are far more things that we can work on together than the things that we can yell and fight about and disagree about.
Well, I think there's something else here too. I'm not quite sure how exactly to say it, and I'm going to simplify a little bit. But I mean, we're talking a lot about Confederate monuments, maybe not just about Confederate monuments, but the Confederacy lasted for 4 years, 1861 to 1865. You know, to invest everything of yourself and your identity in a moment in time, and maybe not the best moment in time, a failed rebellion against the United States to maintain a slaveholders' rebellion. Maybe let's not make that who we are. And I say we, I'm saying, I mean white South Carolinians. There's a lot more that we might be proud of and we might look to in our past that's not this moment. So let's celebrate the best of us and maybe not the worst of us.
We're still in a period of Reconstruction. The period after 1865 to now, you know, even though it's the Reconstruction.
Well, I think we're always going to be under construction. The question is, what does the building process look like? And going back to your original point, you know, I'm a fan of 80s and 70s music. Rob Bass told us it takes two to make the thing go right. And so we have to make certain that we hear the other side, but we have to also make sure the other side hears us. And when we put those two together, let's digest from that conversation or from those talks what really would make all of us proud, not just some of us, because we focus on the some, but we forget about the all.
Good words to leave it at, and we have to leave it right there. So one of the most controversial symbols of the past will always be the Confederate battle flag. And next Thursday, July 22nd, part 1 of a 2-hour film on the flag and its removal from the State House grounds. You'll get a chance to see it then. Here's a quick look now.
Symbols mean a great deal. And flags, because they blow in the wind, they breathe, they mean something.
They can mean one thing when they're originally designed, but as they get used over time, that meaning can change and shift.
The rub is in the meaning.
This young man, Dylan Roof, was a worshiper of that flag.
That's Downing of a Flag. It's premiering next Thursday, July 22nd, and we definitely hope you tune in for it. And thank you all very, very much for being here and sharing your perspectives and starting this very important conversation. For all of us here at South Carolina ETV and South Carolina Public Radio, I'm Felicia Edie. Good night.